Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Disability Dish. This is episode 8. My name is Janelle Diaz. I'm an assistant director in disability services, and I am co-hosting with...
Hi, everybody. Jodi Rachens, Director of Disability Services. We missed you this past month, but we were very busy getting all of our students acclimated and set up for the semester. So we're really excited to be back, and we've got an exciting topic today. Just as a reminder, the point of our podcast is really just to help find topics that we can actively and openly discuss ways that we can support the fellow disability community member, whether in the university, outside networks, everyday lives. It's just important and impactful way to just contribute to making effort to reduce shame and stigma around disability. We plan to work always towards flipping the script and highlight the strengths that can show through various disabilities. And so among the various initiatives that we're doing within our office, this monthly podcast just provides some representation and just general discussion around various topics on disability.
And as always, we want you to make sure that you know that this is just a discussion, conversation, our opinions and perspectives on today's episode topic, which is navigating the workforce as a person with a disability. And we have two awesome guests with us today. So I'm going to start by having each of you state your name, your role at the university or your role in general, your relationship with the word disability if you feel like you have one. And I'll have Beth L start with us because we have two Beths with us today.
Woo-hoo, double Beth!
Double Beth. Beth squared.
Honestly, like there's true Beth power in the room right now.
Oh yeah.
So my name is Beth Loell. I am the assistant director of career services at UMass Lowell. I have been with UML for about 4.5 years now and have been the career services liaison to disability services since I started here. And I was the liaison to disability services in my previous institution as well, where I worked in career services. Professionally, my relationship with the word disability really is through that relationship with disability services. Working with disability services is a really small part of my larger job of advising all students. But I've gotten to work a little more closely with that population through this work. Personally, I'm the parent of a child with a disability. And so through kind of watching her growth and development, I've really come to appreciate more how broad that term is. And I really think in the context of the way I work with students, I see a lot of differing abilities, a lot of different strategies, and maybe different kinds of ways to reach very similar goals as other students that I work with.
Beth has been a rock star partner with us. So
Yay.
we appreciate you.
Excellent.
Okay, Beth B.
All right. Part 2 of the Beth team. So my name is Beth Brassel, and I work, just the bare facts, name, rank, and serial number. I work at the Pollard Library, which is the public library in Lowell. I am the young adult librarian, which means I ply the teenagers with junk food, which I'm really good at that. And I'm also currently the chair of the city's Commission on Disability. So my relationship personally with the term disability, the concept, the identity, I am a person with a disability and have had some version of a disability for most of my life, but in terms of embracing that identity, that's a long process. And it kind of coincides with the changes in my life, but it's, going way out on a limb here, but what the heck. A couple times points in life I've thought it's sort of like embracing the identity of being gay. You have to address the internalized prejudices and stigmas or negative stereotypes. So anyway, I'll stop rambling. Please feel free to cut me off. So, you know, have had a version of a disability. I'm starting about 10 years ago, I became legally blind. Now I'm just plain old flat out blind. But, you know, and I have been fortunate in that I've gotten an enormous amount of support from the administration at the library. So that's been very helpful. And there was a big part of my life where I was just really focused on sort of masking the disability. And then at some point that became impossible, and a healthier relationship with it. Okay, I'll stop talking. Sorry.
You please don't have shame in what you're sharing. It's
No.
you're bringing up themes that have tied through every episode that we have talked about in terms of sort of this complicated relationship with disability and identity and all those pieces. So you're preaching right to the choir.
I just tend to preach a lot, so feel free to cut me off. Just hit that mute button at any point.
Well, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
So, I mean, I think we've got some good basis for sort of how we're going to go on with today's conversation. And I think, you know, let's talk about sort of what we feel like the definition of disability inclusion is and what its place and importance in the workplace is.
Sure.
I'm not sure who wants to go first.
I know it takes a little while to shake off the awkwardness. It's sort of like the popcorn style, but it's all good.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I have a fire truck behind me, so I'm going to mute.
Same. I also do. We're in the same zone here.
Well, I'll just jump in, and again, feel free to hit the mute button. So can you repeat the question? I was framing the thought.
Yeah.
And then
So it's sort of just thinking around what your personal scope around how you would define disability inclusion and like its general importance within the workplace,
Okay,
place in the workplace, and we can pop the questions in the chat too. I don't know if that
oh yeah, no,
that's helpful.
That's fine. So,
Okay.
you know, it's interesting. I have sort of a conflicted relationship with the word inclusion because, and this is just, you know, I don't want to get into semantics, but in my mind, inclusion is we have a set system, we have a set structure, we have a set institution, and we'll see if we can fit you into it. And but I'm not saying that that's true. It's just one of those things I think about. But I know in my my work as a librarian, you know, the individuals at the library who have or identify as having a disability have added enormously to the services, the materials that the library provides, and offering a welcoming environment to the patrons who come in. So, I mean, in terms of inclusion in a positive sense, I think it's critical. I mean, this is the world we live in. It is peopled by an incredible diversity of abilities. And I think it's really critical that it's all represented in our workplaces. It just enriches everything. It's not easy. And, you know, the structures and the set practices and all of that it's an uphill battle, but it's important.
That's a common theme too, is that it's not always easy, but it is important to make sure that, you know, everyone has access.
Yes.
Right. And we've talked about sort of the word inclusion is a tough word too. Like you can be included at the party, but do you
Yes.
feel like you belong and are a part of the party? Is, those can sometimes mean different things. So
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't want to get into semantics, but
this is okay. Semantics are important.
yeah, include, I want to be planning the party. I don't want to just be invited.
Yeah. You want to bring the wine.
That's right. I want to pick out the snacks. I'm good at it.
Yeah, and from the perspective of working with students through their career planning, as I kind of think about inclusion at the different stages, it's making sure that application process is accessible. The
Yes.
interview process, folks are trained on equitable and inclusive hiring practices, and that unconscious bias is something that employers have received training on, and that helps through the application process, but as well as in the workplace. Inclusion isn't just physical access to the building.
No.
It's also setting up structures that are more flexible, and making sure that, I think we were talking a lot about that sense of community and sense of belonging. And
Yes.
that means inclusion has to be not just about the physical access, but also about the community at the workplace.
Yes.
Needs to have some kind of access to training or education. And I know there has to be like emotional and mental changes that happen to address inclusion.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. And, to that end, person with a disability, can't all fall on the person with the disability to
Right.
be making these changes. These things have to be done.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of going to a college autism conference last week, and there's a component of the conference where they talk quite a bit about sort of the preparation for the career and the work stuff. And there were some employers that were there that are part of big companies and kind of part of big initiatives. And one of the first times I really heard a number of employees talk even about a flipped interview process, which was one of the first times that I was really hearing them talk about that the interview process is just not necessarily set up for everybody to thrive. And so they were really talking about flipping it and having a skill-based, like, can this person do the job? Not, can this person be my best friend? Which is, often how people feel. Like, a lot of us in the interview process are like, I'm going to spend a lot of time with this person and I want to get along with this person, but we can sometimes lose sort of, can the person do well and contribute to this job in this company? And so they were kind of addressing some components of even just from the get-go, which really I was very proud to hear that there were some big companies having some conversations like that. So as Beth Loell was saying, that, it isn't necessarily the responsibility of the person with the disability to do the changes, that, that organizations really need to look at, what their talent pool is going to look like and how do they really understand the talents from all different angles.
Right, exactly. Can I do a shame? I'm a librarian. I can't help this. Can I plug particular books?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, there's a book I just finished reading by Devin Price, and it's called Unmasking Autism.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I hear yeah.
It was in our newsletter a few months ago as
it's
the book reviews.
so good.
Yeah.
So good. But
nice.
really lots of insight into, the challenges of a person, in the neurodiversity community, tackling the world and what the world misses when it doesn't open up and doesn't accommodate and doesn't value the diversity. So, okay, that's my shameless plug. Sorry.
No, that's like a great segue into our next question in terms of, what do you feel are the benefits of hiring a person who identifies as having a disability?
I love this question.
Yeah.
Go.
I was so excited to see this question on the list, because I think that so often, like when I'm involved in a conversation around disability, so often it's around the challenges, and I'm glad we're spending so much time talking about this, but there are so many benefits, and I think that that's not highlighted enough. So first and foremost, I think it's really important to acknowledge, we were talking about that interview process. Can the person do the job? It's really important to acknowledge the benefit of hiring just a qualified person first, right? If you are qualified to do the job, there are benefits of hiring you. But the additional strengths that come with hiring a person with a disability, oftentimes these are folks who have really great perseverance. They are problem solvers. They are creative thinkers because they've had to find different strategies to do things that other people have done in one typical way over time. I've been really pleased to be involved in conversations with some folks who really are experts in disability employment and really are the folks who train employers on this. And some of the great examples I've heard is, if you have a disability where one of the ways it presents is you like really get into the nitty-gritty with things, well, maybe bring a certain level of attention to detail that other people don't bring. How can you talk about that as a strength, not as a disability, but how does it bring something additional to the team, right? So I think highlighting those strengths that are unique to your own presentation of disability, that's going to be really individualized, but everybody has it.
Right. No,
Yeah, like saying you're somebody that can catch something that others might not be able to catch, that either can propel the work forward or make the work look more professional in the end, or any of those pieces. Yeah, that's a great point.
Right. No, I think that's an excellent point. And the idea of having had to think creatively and persevering, it's so important, to navigate the world, to navigate school, to navigate the workplace. And those are really good qualities. But also additionally, and again, I'm speaking from my experience in the workplace as a librarian, is that you see things and you don't want to have to always be the voice of, hey, but have you thought about, but that is a role. So, the people who are in charge of publicity put out these fabulous flyers with amazing graphics. And you have people on staff who can say, well, that's really beautiful, but, would Beth be able to read that? Or, and then again, speaking strictly from the work that I do, but every job you're going to work with people, and, for the public to come in, people to come in and see, the many faces, the diversity of the staff, and feel like, well, this feels like a welcoming place. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think to that point, seeing representation 100%, it feels more welcoming. It feels more like, oh, this is somewhere, I belong. Or on the other hand, if it's accessing services, this person will understand where I'm coming from or has a sense or an idea. Or even on the other end, if it's like an organization, like thinking about how can we provide access to a bigger community, right?
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, I think that the thing too that we're sort of always talking about, the diversity and equity stuff of like, people experiencing people who have some of the same stuff with them makes it feel like a more welcoming place, whether you're, in the LGBTQ identifying group, if you are, a person of color, whether there's a certain religion thing or, different assets of diversity. And in some cases, it doesn't always mean that like it's the same diversity features as you, but that there is a collective of representation. And and it helps everybody's sort of general tolerance level. I was meeting with somebody yesterday who's from Argentina, and she said that, in their education system in Argentina, if you have any kind of disability, you are still yanked and go to another school. And she had no exposure to anybody else, and then she had, an invisible disability that, was in the mental health range. And so it was a really, difficult thing for her, because it was so stigmatized, that it was, so separate still. And that was, that's been really challenging for her to work through her identity and kind of how to deal with that.
Sure. Wow.
Yeah. And so she's in a workplace now in the disability field, and was really kind of trying to figure out, knowing that other people in the United States have grown up with a different level of exposure, and kind of working on some of her own stuff with that. So, I think the more exposure we have, regulates, I don't really like the word normalizes, but regulates, people's experience, that we can put a person behind the experience rather than just somebody with a condition or a disability.
Right. Just enriches the whole workplace, everything. So yes.
Yeah. So on the flip side, there's a research note that says, non-disabled workers are 3 times more likely than disabled workers to be employed. And so thinking through what are the factors, barriers that might be impacting this, and then there's sort of a secondary part, but we'll pick that out in a second. So just thinking about what that's about.
So this is Beth Loell. And I will say, this is certainly not my area of expertise, anything related to like policy, law, like all of that is not my expertise area. But, from my experiences, first, I think it's important to acknowledge the American with Disabilities Act isn't that old.
No.
So we're still working from a space of great transition and great change. So I've been really pleased to see a lot of the employers that we work with at UMass Lowell are starting to put more tangible, concrete systems in place to help change the statistic that we're talking about right now. But there's still definitely work to be done. And so to that point, thinking about these barriers, like I had mentioned earlier, I tend to work with students and job seekers at the level of barriers in accessing employment in the first place. So barriers related to accessing an application, if they have a disability that impacts their ability to read an electronic document that's not screen readable, is something that we've seen before. A lot of the times we're seeing folks who are accessing or up against unconscious bias in the interview process, or who have disabilities that present in the form of communication challenges that either kind of trigger someone's unconscious bias in the interview process and make it difficult for them to really see the qualifications, or make it difficult for the individual to verbalize their qualifications. So that traditional interview style sometimes isn't a great indicator of someone's ability to do a job, just like not everyone's a good test taker.
Right.
Everyone's a good interviewer.
No.
So that's a lot of what we see in career services when it comes to the barriers. But then once someone does access a job, what barriers are they facing in the workplace? We talked about that feeling of being part of the community. You made it to the job, but if you're in a job that doesn't have flexible hours and that's something you need, or you're in a job that requires you to be in person and you need some level of remote work, those are barriers that I think people have been fighting a very long time.
Right. And, as you pointed out, the ADA is young as laws go. And, we can look at the Civil Rights Act, 1964, and how far we still have to go. But also with the ADA, there's the perennial issue of enforcement. Like, who's in charge of enforcing this? How do we enforce it? How do we not enforce it? But also, I think from my perspective, when you look at the statistic, of lack of access to employment, I think you have to go all the way back to, education, to schools, to public schools. So because that, it doesn't just pop out of nowhere that a person has encountered barriers. It's likely they've been encountering barriers their whole life in the education system, in, cultural activities, all kinds of ways in which the barriers have been there and just make it harder and harder and harder. And yes, definitely unconscious bias is huge and is a thing that I think a person with a disability who is working at an institution or organization can maybe help. Not that it's their responsibility, but break that down.
Beth, as you're talking, I'm reminded of Jodi's point earlier about having worked with a student from Argentina who said, if you have any sort of disability, you're yanked out of your
Right.
school and you're put into a different school. And so when we do talk about these barriers, it is like a whole lifelong kind
Yeah.
of journey you have to be considering, because at the K-12 level, if you have a disability and you're pulled out of the classroom and don't have access to the same classes as non-disabled students, well, are you getting appropriately set up to be able to access college? When you're in college, if you're not getting the supports that you need to complete your degree, that's going to impact the kinds of jobs that you can access. So it's a full life cycle that really impacts someone's entire career trajectory and entire lifetime.
Well said. Yes.
And I think we need to also be thinking about, we don't do as much of that, pull kids out method as much anymore in the US, which is great. But, thinking about the idea of, we're trying to flip the thing around, like not just teaching somebody how not to get bullied, but how the bully should not bully, and thinking about how the general others, from the bottom up, as they grow up to be future employers someday, that kind of normalizing thing and feeling comfortable and regular with everybody around them and differences, as a human nature, we can be uncomfortable with differences. That happens a lot, even just when we're having conversations with faculty and different students, and half of the time it's them kind of checking with us around like how they address something because they're just uncomfortable and they don't want to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. And once we can get them over that hurdle, it's like a lovely experience for the instructor and the student, and they can take that that data point with them in the future as like, oh, this student was actually a rock star in my class once I got through some of my stuff, so I think that there's a piece of that that's a barrier too, is that the lack of exposure that employers may have had with the creative thinking and the creative process, is just as much of a barrier as certain disabilities maybe as a barrier. We also know there's like this catch-22 with sort of the health system of like getting money for benefits that you might need, or for care that you might need. So in both directions, like you might need to be employed for a certain amount of health insurance and healthcare, but you also may not be able to employ as many hours as you can.
Right.
In both ways, you may not be able to work as many hours as that job is asking for, or you may want more hours, but you can't reach a certain cap, in order to receive the supports that you get. So it's sort of like a vicious cycle in that way too.
And a big support for something that is affected by that is care for some people. Some people require personal care attendance, and that would be highly impacted if someone is making too much, but then you're working and you're making money, but then you're paying for your care. So really, are you able to advance? It's again, like you said, Jodi, this catch-22, and it's a very big barrier that exists.
I'll do another shameless plug for a book.
Yes, we're going to take all the resources.
Okay, but this one isn't specifically related to disability, but it's a memoir by Fiona Hill called "There Is Nothing for You Here." But what I really liked about it is kind of a thread that runs through the memoir is this concept of the infrastructure of opportunity. And do we have the infrastructure of opportunity in our world, as we said, starting from, childhood and going through? So do we have, the supports in place so that you can do a job, earn a good wage, and also have a PCA covered by insurance? So yes, lots.
They definitely impact a lot, but I can't agree more in terms of it goes back to just having basic needs met, right?
Yep.
And are those basic needs being met?
Yep.
Because for a lot, they are not.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah. Are there any kind of other systemic structures that we feel like are in place that are impacting disability inclusion in the workplace that you can think of, or that you've experienced, or that you've seen, or you feel like you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, just off the top of my head, and this is a real challenging one, is that internalized bias that employers, school systems, and have. So not just individual employers, but institutions, organizations, it's kind of baked in a bias against, and I think Beth Loell mentioned this, particularly if someone has a communication disability, but I think coming to terms with the biases, the stigmas, the stereotypes, because all those things feed into the structure. So that's sort of vague, but it's the thing that pops into my head.
No, I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more. Sorry, go ahead, Beth.
Sorry. Along the lines of what Beth B is saying, a lot of what we work with individuals on in career services, if someone knows like, hey, my communication style is going to be a challenge, we work with folks on developing statements to address that at the beginning of an interview.
Yeah,
Right.
That's great.
I have, and we work with them on how do you want to phrase it? Do you want to phrase it as, I have a disability that impacts my communication style, but please don't take my communication as a sign that I'm not interested or qualified.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you to give me some time so that I can prove to you that I'm the right fit for this job. We work with them on the phrasing that they're comfortable with, but sometimes putting it out in the open and forcing the person you're interviewing with to get comfortable with that idea. It helps move the needle. And that also comes back to, it shouldn't be the job of the individual with a disability to do all the work, but doing a little bit of the work can force someone else to start also doing the work,
Right.
But something unique that we see too at the collegiate level is just that the entry level job market is competitive. And so we see, not just with individuals with disabilities, but with all students, a lot of the times entry level jobs read as, we're looking for a bachelor's degree plus a year of experience. So if you faced barriers getting an internship, or we have kind of this set idea of a 4-year graduation timeline at the bachelor's level. And that's, for most folks, a 12 to 16 credit semester every fall and every spring. So if you weren't able to then also make room for an internship in that space, then you're graduating with your bachelor's degree, but you don't have the years of experience or don't really know how to account for that. That creates a barrier to accessing an entry-level job that is in line with your degree pathway.
Right. And again, that's the barriers on top of barriers starting early on. So,
Yeah, that is something that a number of our students face for all kinds of different reasons, but sometimes classes is all they can do, with, the effort that it takes to sustain classes. And we try to do a lot with flexibility around, taking the college experience slower and taking a reduced course load and, and taking things in smaller bits so that, some students in general just have outside factors that they have going on, but perhaps a student could work and those sort of things. But there's so many different reasons why somebody may not be able to attain all that experience prior to that diploma being put in the hand, and that then creates another barrier. And it's also hard to then shake it off with the students a little bit about like what they're going to do that next year right after their diploma that they thought they were going to do, but maybe there's trying to be creative and finding a way that can still put a collection of skills together and experiences in a setting together that may not go right along the same trajectory as they sort of expected. Like you got a business degree and you expected to join like a fast-paced, exciting marketing company, may not have, may not be the first thing you're going to do, but you're going to, do something that gains some translatable skills, right? And Beth Loell is the one who's gonna who knows more about that. And you kind of just opened our door to our next question. And I love when people do this for us. Is the disclosure, the complicated disclosure along the various steps of the ladder in the workplace, getting the job and through the job.
I'm gonna let Beth B take this one first. I feel like I've launched the last like 2 questions.
No. This is such an excellent question. And again, that the book that we referenced, Unmasking Autism, definitely a good chunk of it that deals with this. But it's not something I think that a person can just naturally know what to do. And so the more support that a young person, an old person, a person gets in terms of understanding what their fears are, how legitimate the fears are, and then approaches, as Beth Loell mentioned, ways to disclose. There was early in my career as a librarian, I was visually impaired. I wasn't legally blind, but I was terrified of I'm a librarian. They can't know this. But little did I know it was obvious, but oh well. But, there were a lot of fears, some of them unfounded, some of them may very well have been founded. So I think it's a really, really tricky territory, and the more support a person can get in terms of hashing out, knowing their rights, knowing what supports are in place and strategies. I think it's not to be tackled all alone.
And I think to Beth B's point, to Beth B's point, something that employers can be doing to help with that. And I know like UMass Lowell, a lot of different offices will do this when we're hiring people, is we actually put a note in the interview invitations saying, if you require an accommodation for your interview process, here's the contact information. So not making that something that a person has to dig for, I think creates the sense of like, one, I am welcome to access an accommodation, but 2, like it's top of mind for this employer, which creates, I hope for people, a sense of belonging already at the start of this process, because you should be able to access accommodations. You should be made to feel comfortable disclosing at the point of application or at the point of interview, even though you're not an employee yet. Like if it's appropriate and it's something that's going to help you and you are comfortable with and want to do, you should be able to do that before you are employed. But it helps when the employer makes that a comfortable space.
Yes.
But there's definitely pros and cons, and there's a lot of personal feelings to navigate around that. But if you've got a disability that is going to be perceived, like we talked a lot about communication in the interview process, will it benefit you more to acknowledge it so that people's unconscious bias is just brought like right to the surface so that they can consciously deal with it?
Right.
Or are you more comfortable not talking about it? It's a super personal and really difficult choice. But in the workplace, if you know that I have a disability that presents in such a way that someone might misunderstand something I'm doing, or
Mhm.
someone might misperceive a way that I approach something. Disclosing can help get ahead of inappropriate discipline,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's where, again, employers making clear lines of communications between employees and human resources, between employees and hiring managers or supervisors, that's super important because you have to know who is your appropriate contact.
Right.
Mhm.
Agreed.
I mean, you know, you're so right that disclosure is very personal, and it also is more personal when there's an invisible disability situation on hand, right?
Mhm.
And so, where this comes up in almost every podcast is sort of the different realm of sort of the visible disability versus the invisible disability. And like, as you were talking, Beth L, it was reminding me that, so I have a chronic medical condition. I have Crohn's disease, and on most days I'm in good health, things are good. I take my medicine and things are, I've had this condition for 15 years, but there was a period of time at a job that I had, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, where there was like a pretty strong possibility that I was going to have a surgery that was going to take me out for 6 weeks. And I hadn't disclosed to my workplace or, my supervisor that I had Crohn's disease because it didn't come up in my work. It was almost never necessary to really come up. And then I kind of had to face it head on. Like, if
Yeah.
I'm going to have to plan a surgery that is going to, be very large surgery that is going to have a 6-week recovery. And this was, prior to, we had a question on here about COVID, like prior to the being able to work remotely kind of situation that I might have been able to swing a little bit more now, that I was going to have to kind of like start that conversation about how my work is going to happen. And I in that instance, I was able to get treated differently and didn't have to have the surgery. But the reality is with Crohn's disease is it never fully goes in remission. And there's a decent likelihood at some point in my life that surgery will become a reality at any given time. And I'll have to face it again, and we always tell our students, like, we tell our students, like, if you just register with us, like, you don't have to use your accommodations, but like it makes things like smoother and easier in the event that you want to and need to. And I don't even take my own advice when I think about that. Like, I haven't, registered with HR, as somebody with an invisible disability who it doesn't really impact my work day, but it could. And, so it's just so complicated all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, we should just name this podcast, It's Complicated.
That's an excellent name. It is.
Disability, it's complicated.
It's complicated, exactly.
New name, phase 2.
Exactly. No. True.
I feel like kind of on the other end of that, identifying as a person like with a physical disability that's very present, that I feel like whether it's personally, feel like I'm overcompensating, during the interview process of like, no, like I can do it. I can prove to you that I can do it.
Right.
Like if that's just me kind of feeling those internal feelings, or if, I do feel like I recognize that there are kind of some, preconceived thoughts about what I can and cannot do. But it's kind of like that constant, like, I need to prove that, I can do it and that they want to hire me.
Yeah. It's a lot of stress.
Most definitely.
Stress
But-
on already stress.
But to your point, Beth L, employers can be doing a lot to kind of show that they are a welcoming and inviting community. And let's kind of talk about that a little bit more. Like, what other ways can an organization or employer promote, disability inclusion in the workplace?
Well,
Beth,
go. No, go right ahead.
So something I had mentioned, like making sure there's notes in invitations for
Mhm.
interviews, or there's notes in applications. Like if you required accommodation, here's your access. That is a really helpful open door. Something that we see some organizations doing is creating employee resource groups for any sort of marginalized group.
Mhm.
So you have a sense of community, but also it's less of a feeling of I need to be the one speaking up. I need to be the one like setting an example or being the voice of X. Like there is a group of people who can work together. And if there's a systemic issue happening at a workplace, you know you have a community of folks to help navigate that. But also you just have a sense of, I don't know, relationship with people in the first place, a
Mhm.
feeling of not being alone
Right.
in it. Something that I've been really pleased to see is not just recruiters being trained on equitable hiring practices, but also the hiring managers. Because oftentimes, what we had been seeing was like recruiters were well trained, but then when you meet with the manager of that department, maybe they haven't been as well trained on equitable hiring practices. And we're seeing a lot more of that, as well as employee trainings in general on
Yeah.
diverse workplaces.
Right.
Right. So just making that available to everybody in the workspace makes a culture of acceptance in a workspace. But also, I think we talked like just as Coach Jodi, you mentioned the flexibility that's come in light of COVID. In
Right.
it really proved not every job has to be done in person, 9 to 5.
Mhm.
So I think opening up the flexibility in terms of timeframes and locations where work is done,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's been a huge win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like that idea of a statement of accommodation on all the materials that someone might be accessing when they're seeking employment. It just says so much. I think it would, opportunity for a sigh of relief. But okay, this is saying something. This employer is, at least on paper, and is open to accommodating diverse needs. And also within a place of employment, within a work site, to have, groups of people who are, so it's not, like you said, it's not just the person or persons with disabilities, but everybody involved in creating a welcoming environment and working creatively to improve access. So yes to all of that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it starting from that beginning step, but walking the talk as well. I think about my husband who works in sales and he has ADD, and we've had many conversations in our existence together around the fact that he doesn't tell anybody that he has ADD and he doesn't ask for any accommodations. And we are old enough that we kind of rode through a time where he didn't have like accommodations in college or for the SATs and those kinds of things. So he sort of has these tools that he's come up with for himself that like work. But sometimes I think that he would benefit from, because there's been a lot of times where things have been tough for him work-wise, where things have been misinterpreted in the way he's done something, or one of the tools that he came up with is that, when he's at a meeting, he just tries to write every single thing everybody says down so we can go back to them later because he doesn't want to miss anything. But you know what he misses? He misses like the nuances of what's going on. He misses the nuances of even the tone of somebody's voice because he's just getting the rote words down. And that was something he started in college, as like, I just need to write everything down and then I will go back and review it. And now he's at a place where their policy is to record every single meeting that they have. And now he can go back and he can listen and look at, sometimes they're video recorded, and he can even look at the room in a way that, in review, and was like, ooh, actually that person didn't like the thing I said about that component of this software or whatever. And it's been, but he, so we talk about that, and he still feels like he doesn't need to reveal, but I'm like, maybe your supervisor might understand and work with you differently sometimes when, you know, there's some way that you interpreted something or you were impulsive about a decision, that, you know, that you could explain that better. But it's still kind of like, for him, he's, you know, he's been successful and he's made it work. I think sometimes he could make it work better if he were willing to open that door to conversation.
Right.
And in a space where, you know, you're on that fence, like, I don't need to reveal, and maybe like you're already established in a workspace, and so why I'm not having a challenge now. I think that comes back to the conversation of visibility
Yeah.
that we talked about, I think, a little bit at the beginning of this is, you know, the more people see diversity in their workplace, the more it really like brings unconscious bias to the surface so people can deal with it and workplaces truly become more accepting. And I, you know, hate this idea of like, you have to be the champion
Oh,
for
gosh.
everyone else's sake. You know, as I think about my daughter
Right.
growing up, we've had a lot of conversations of like people say to us, like, she could be an inspiration for other people
Wow.
with this diagnosis. I'm like, I don't want her to have to be
Yeah.
that. That's
Yeah.
not
That's
fair.
all-
Like, who put
that's-
this on her shoulders? She should get
Again,
to
yeah.
choose.
Yeah.
And it's on the flip side of that, you know, if she decides this is part of my identity and I do want to like make this known to people, she does other people a favor for sure by
Mhm.
Right.
making it visible and showing like, hey, if you had this one like really preconceived notion of what disability is and what people with disabilities are capable of, like,
Yeah.
maybe this shakes that.
Yeah.
And I think too, with when it comes to visibility and asking, you know, coming out and asking
Mhm.
for the help that you need, one of the fears I think is embedded in society's ridiculous and awful stereotypes of
Mhm.
a lot of people, not just people with disabilities, but, you know, many marginalized communities that, oh, always asking for something, or, oh,
Yeah.
getting advantages, nobody else gets that, so unfair, you know.
Mhm.
So whether or not an employer or a person you're dealing with has those biases, it's
Fair.
something we grow up with, you know. I actually had someone say to me, in referencing a wonderful teen intern I had who was legally blind. Someone say to me, well, you know, he's so great. I mean, he's not just sitting at home feeling sorry for himself. And I wanted to say, is that what you think people with disabilities do? You know.
Right.
So anyways, I think combating those realities and also combating those internalized
Right.
ideas.
This conference that I went to, they had a bunch of like a panel of employers, and IBM stuck out for me. That, you know, they're a huge giant company, and they have like a group and like efforts for people who identify as neurodivergent, and like there's over 1,000 employees that participate in this work group, you know, and they do policy stuff, but they also just have a community, and they can, you know, a new person who it starts there can get kind of like folded into a community and elect to have like a buddy to like the work culture, you know, and all of that stuff. And, you know, I think about somebody like my husband, who, if there was a community that was like, hey, look, like there's a group for people that have neurodivergence, like, don't you want to just like talk to them about like how hard it is sometimes, you know? And you know, if it was just like openly right there, and here's your welcome packet for working here, and here's a thing about these like various ways that, you know, our people can connect, you know, it would be, you know, it would just be such a different experience, wouldn't it?
It would be huge.
Mhm.
So shout out to IBM, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
So unfortunately, we are wrapping up on time. So we have to go to our final question,
Mhm.
which is, after this conversation, what is the takeaway that will stick with you? And if there's anything that has changed about how you feel, either as a person with a disability or as an ally, about disability stigma. So again, takeaway, and is there anything that has changed?
Well, I want to run right out and buy stock in IBM. No, but just reinforcing, but also the possibility of structural institutional changes, such as you were describing at IBM, to make a workplace inviting, welcoming, and that it's simple things. It's not insurmountable. It's not insurmountable, but sometimes it's starting with the simple things like the statement of accommodation on applications. And so I think that's amazing, and I will definitely take that with me.
I think one of my kind of key takeaways and places I think is also like kind of hard to sit is there's such a delicate balance when it comes to making progress in changing those stats on disability employment.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be the work of the person with the disability, and at the same time, the person without a disability who's putting things in place, like if they don't know what challenge you're facing, can't help. So I feel like it comes back to more of a place of like there needs to be a culture of partnership, and there needs to be a culture of communication within workplaces around all things, because that makes having a conversation with your supervisor about an accommodation that you need, or having a conversation with your supervisor about a challenge that you're facing in the workplace, a lot easier. I kind of come back to the conversations that we've been having about it shouldn't be on the shoulders of the person with the disability to do the work. It should be on the employer to be doing the work, but they have to know what work they're doing.
Right. True. And what things should or shouldn't be isn't necessarily how they are, So yeah, it shouldn't, but to some level it is.
Progress and keep going.
I'm excited to see. I hope there are conversations like this in 20 years. When we think about the ADA was founded in 1990. So really like, I don't think I'm that old, but like when I think about that, like was going to school when the ADA was really new. And so I'm excited to see these kids who are in school now, who are in K-12 now, while ADA has been established, and employers have been having more time to be influenced by folks who've grown up with it. I'm super excited to see 20 years from now how this conversation has changed even more.
Okay, so pencil the double bets for October 21st, 2042.
Oh dear God. Okay. I'll see what I can do. I don't know. I think I have a dentist appointment that
I know, right?
But yeah. Those are good. That is good to see. And you think about the people back in, I forget what year, many decades ago, way before the ADA, who took part in the Capitol crawl, where they physically crawled across the Washington, DC Capitol to advocate for accessibility. So they might look and go, wow, look at the work that we've done. So anyway, okay.
Janelle plays a little.
Sorry. Yeah. So for me, I would probably say a takeaway would be kind of Beth Loell, what you had said about kind of having that conversation and disclosing at the beginning of the interview to allow the employer to kind of check their biases. I've never thought about that. So I thought that was pretty neat. I access that whenever I need it. But yeah, so that would be my takeaway.
Good. Excellent.
Okay. I think are we there?
Awesome. Yeah, we're there. So thank you both so much.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, everyone. This is great.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us to the